against good, faithful people and good beer. Amen.
Amen.
Oh man.
So, all right, after months of threatening to do a God and beer circle, I finally did it a few months ago. Called on a bunch of friends, say, hey, if you'd like to come and talk about faith. And they wanted to come and talk about beer, but I talked about faith anyway. So I'm going to go through a little of that with you, how I used beer as a segue into faith, and tell you how it all went. Okay. So there's a lot of different types of beer. Real quickly, everybody name a style of beer.
Cold.
IPA.
Guinness.
That's what I was gonna say, or
Porter.
yeah, thank you. I was trying to think of the dark one.
Pilsner.
Light.
All right. That tells
Or best of all, free.
Did you say cold earlier, Rick? Yeah.
Of course they did.
You know why they serve American beer cold? Because when something's really cold, what you taste is the cold, not the beer.
It's true.
All right.
Looks like Jeff knew that.
Is
We
that why I
did.
don't like to drink warm beer?
Some time ago, we had a friend who was a cardiologist, and we'd go to these parties at his house, and he loved to do this. He would get his friends there, and he would bet that they could not pick their beer. He would ask their style of beer, whether it was, European beers or Pilsners or whatever, their style. And he would say, okay, I'm going to give you 3 similar beers. And out of the 4, everybody's going to try to pick the beers. You think one out of 4 times the people could pick the beer. But the people who are the most strong about their opinions, that they could always pick their beer because they liked how it tasted and the other ones tasted lousy, they can never pick their beer. It happened over and over again. So our oldest daughter, Maureen, her boyfriend, Jeff, we were down there at Christmas this year, and he heard about this story, and he said, okay, we got to try that. And we're going to do light beers. And just to make it easier, one of them had to be Corona Light because he knew he could pick Corona Light. And also his friend, he knew he could pick it as well. So we got the beers. 4 light beers: Miller Light, Bud Light, Coors Light, and Corona Light, just so it would be easy. And out of the dozen people over there, about 8 or 9 of them tasted the beers and made their choices. The 2 people who felt that they could absolutely pick their beer, Jeff and Mike, got 0 out of 4 right. And once again, the beer challenge came through. Which leads you to the question, what is it that people like about their beer? If it was the taste, you think they could figure it out and taste it, but they can't. Maybe it's the brand. It's the advertising. Or maybe it's how they feel when they're around their friends drinking their beer. What is their emotional attachment to their beer, which they will claim to their dying day it's taste. And even after they fail, they says, well, I bet I can taste the difference if it's in a can or a bottle. I says, you couldn't even pick your beer. How are you going to tell that? Anyway. So it led me on the discussion with this group I had before me, who were drinking wine, except for Lindsay. I says, what is it causes you this emotional attachment to something that's a favorite of yours, in this case, beer? And to think about that, maybe it's not the taste. I mean, remember the Pepsi challenge? They would give 10 Coke drinkers a blind taste test of Coke versus Pepsi, and 9 out of 10 would pick Pepsi over and over. Even when Coke did the test, it was 9 out of 10 people picked Pepsi. So Coke got alarmed about this. They thought people like Pepsi better than Coke. So they decided we need to make a new flavor of Coke that people will like better than Pepsi. I'm sure they tasted this over and over and over and over and came out with new Coke. And the people hated it. Not because it tasted better, not because it tasted better than Pepsi. It wasn't Coke. What they liked was the brand of Coke classic Coke was what they wanted, not the taste of Pepsi. You'd think that the Coke people who had spent billions of dollars perfecting the art of the brand would have had some thought about, well, maybe the brand is working. It's not the taste, it's the brand that's important. But no, they went and made new Coke and took Coke off the shelf of all things. A huge uproar. So finally they brought back the old Coke as classic Coke alongside new Coke. And eventually new Coke just went by the wayside and Coke's market share went up during that whole process as they went through this.
Now, Jim,
Yep.
I will mention to you part of the Pepsi challenge. Pepsi always beat Coke in the challenges.
Yeah.
However, when they did a 1 week challenge, Coke always won. Because they found over the course of a week, they found Pepsi being too sweet. So I thought that was interesting. Like on the initial taste, Pepsi always won, but it was anything a week or longer, Coke always came back.
Yeah. That's probably true, but it sounds like an excuse for the losers to me.
Of course.
Because those people who can't pick their beer brand, they'll always have a reason. Or it was out of a can, not a bottle. Oh, it was out of a bottle, not a can. Oh. They'll always have a reason because in their mind, they know their beer.
Sure.
But is it what they know is the brand or something else and not the taste of the beer? So think of something that you really like. I mean, here in the South United States, there's mayonnaise. People got to have their mayonnaise. So everybody name a brand of mayonnaise.
Duke.
Well, if you talk to my family, Miracle Whip is mayonnaise.
Oh, no.
I know. I have learned. I have grown up and learned that there's I used to think Miracle Whip was mayonnaise. It is not. There's a huge difference.
No. Miracle Whip is the light beer of mayonnaise.
Duke's mayonnaise.
Duke's, yeah. Okay. So now outside of the Southeast, mayonnaise, people. Okay, it's mayonnaise, but somehow in the South here, you got to have your mayonnaise. Now I wonder if you could do a mayonnaise taste test. Could people pick their mayonnaise or not?
Yes.
I think we got to think about that one of these days. Except we have to figure out we can't just taste it by itself. It has to be some recipe.
You ever notice nobody ever picks Kraft?
Yeah.
Well, there's a reason for that.
Okay. Remember your favorite, remember your first car? Everybody got in your mind your first car? You got your first car in your mind? Okay. What's your favorite memory with that car?
Learning how to drive it.
Yeah.
Can we say that in public?
The sound it made. Mine sounded like a wind-up toy. My dad called it my wind-up car because it would do the click, 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 click.
I drove my first car in Norman, Oklahoma, entire year without brakes.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Moonroof
Uh-huh.
without brakes. Yikes.
I mean, I would stop on the dime at the traffic light, mainly because I shifted the shift.
It must not have been a hilly city.
The shift gear, it was what do you call that thing? I mean, like manual gears, first
Shift.
gear, second gear, third gear.
Sick.
I would change them so fast that it would stop at a dime. I mean, so I was very, very, very good at that.
I thought maybe you just turned it off.
No.
It must have been flat there, no hills, right?
Oh man, it was a joke. But yeah.
So a lot of people have that favorite memory from that first car. It may not have been your own car, maybe it's somebody else's, but that memory sticks with you. And that memory attaches you to that car, probably much more than how well it drove, or was it cool, or was it safe, or some memory, or something happened with that car that is attaching you to that experience. Okay? So there's this issue of why do you like something? I grew up on a farm, so people either had green tractors or red tractors, John Deere or International Harvester. For some reason, One day, my dad switched from red tractors to green tractors. I have no idea why. He never explained it to us. All of a sudden, I was driving a green tractor instead of a red tractor. The pickup truck that goes beyond the farm, extends beyond the farm. People have their favorite truck. Car, mayonnaise. Back to beer. Every beer has a logo. Every beer has a little saying that goes with it. Like my dad's favorite beer was Miller High Life, the champagne of bottled beers. Anybody know any other brands that have a little catchphrase that go with them?
Oh, Ham's beer.
Yeah.
From the land of sky blue waters.
Hey, there you go. Yeah.
Of course, is head for the mountains.
Oh, yeah.
Easter daylight Schaefer time.
All right.
Or Schlitz. Let's get together with a glass of Schlitz.
Okay. All right. Now, let's move on to a related topic here. What happens when your favorite transitions to a kind of a new style, a different thing, a different area? For example, Coke went to Diet Coke, and they called it Diet Coke because they didn't want anybody thinking it was Coke, because Coke was Coke. So they called it Diet Coke. What a terrible name for a beverage, Diet Coke. And so Pepsi copied, called it Diet Pepsi. Why didn't they just start out with Coke Zero? Not Coke Zero sugar, just Coke Zero. But no, they had to call it Diet Coke. So now, as all the people would, yes, as all the people were watching their calories, the beer people decided we're going to make a diet beer. No way are they going to call it diet beer. Maybe Coke can get away with that, but we're not calling it diet beer. Well, there's a fact. What is diet beer? It has less alcohol, has lower carbs, and it has lower calories. You know why? Because they brew it for less time. And that's why it's cheaper. Because they can make more beer in the same amount of time. Because it's cheaper, because this guy came up with these enzymes that let them brew a little faster. And they brew it less. So there's less calories, less carbs, less alcohol, and less taste. So drink it colder. So that's how they made diet beer. And it was cheaper because you could do it faster. Now, what people thought was there wasn't more taste that Miller High Life has than the others. I mean, 12 ounces of beer, it's mostly water. It's the water, so it fills you up, not the alcohol. So what did they advertise? So when it came to advertising diet beer, which doesn't taste better than beer, what do you advertise to the beer drinking world? Anybody remember what they used to advertise here? Buy this diet beer.
Less filling, tastes great.
Exactly right. Miller Lite. Less filling, tastes great. Two things here. They didn't say it tasted better. Because remember, Miller was a champagne and a bottle of beers. You don't want to take away from your top brand because those are the bosses. You just got this new diet beer coming out. Less filling, great. I can drink more. It wasn't that it would be fewer calories, but if it's less filling, I can drink more of it. That's good for the beer drinking public. And they said it had a great taste. The second thing they used was humor. It was a big transition in the beer advertising as they went to all the ads, especially the football ads, were about humor. And the combination of the humor and less filling, great taste caused the explosion of drinking diet beer. A major shift in the whole industry. Now, I've been talking about beer all this time, but what does that have to do with faith? Well, think of the similar questions. Why is it you like or choose the faith that you have? Is it because the faith is resonating with you? Is it because it's helping in your personal relationship with God? Or is it the brand of faith that you've always grown up with and you're attached to that brand? You've always been there, or your parents have been there, or you like it. What's causing you to choose that faith versus something else? Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Well, it wouldn't be part of the whole inherited faith thing? That's what you grew up with?
Mhm.
Ooh, Catholicism, the Coke of religion.
So I wonder if how often people ask themselves, why do I belong to this denomination? Why do I
Because it
belong to
makes
this
sense.
congregation? Sarah, go ahead.
Because it makes sense.
Because it makes sense. Yeah,
Because
okay.
it makes sense.
Is it how much of it is the brand that you've been hearing through your whole life versus how much of it is it how you feel about your personal relationship with God? I'm not expecting an answer tonight. I just want you to think about that for a while. Because I've had this group together 3 times now. It's a group of about 16 people I invite, and about 6 or 8 come each time. It's always been a different group. And with each group, I start out by saying, I want you to think about why you have the faith that you have. I don't want you to answer it. I'm not expecting an answer right now. I just want you to, each time we meet, I say, I want you to think about this as we go through the discussion. Why do you have the faith that you have? Like, why do you drink the beer that you drink? Why do you use the mayonnaise that you use? So while everything in your life is influenced by branding and advertising, as proof by the beer challenge, why should your faith be any different? Just think about it. Maybe we should advertise for faith. God and Jesus have a bad image among some people. Perhaps this is more a reflection of some negative aspects of religion rather than the image of God and Jesus. I heard a saying recently, when you're having a conversation and somebody quotes from the Bible, it tells you more about them than it does about what was in the Bible. The Sigerty Foundation put together a multi-million-dollar ad campaign last year. It's called He Gets Us. It included 2 Super Bowl commercials, real Super Bowl commercials. And it was trying to promote Jesus Christ as someone who gets us, mainly to young people. It wasn't about the Bible. It wasn't about religion. It was about this image of Jesus that he gets us. He understands us. And there were some interesting commercials. They're going to do it again this year, I believe. Okay.
So maybe Jesus just needs some better marketing.
I hate to put it that way, but yeah, maybe. If something influences us in our choices, people have recognized that in advertising and marketing, and honed it to a fine art.
You know, if only we had
Well-
someone that understood marketing that could explain that.
I have a
Well,
question.
Rick, but isn't Sunday sermons supposed to be doing that?
Have you listened to a sermon lately?
No, but
And
especially the fundamentalists, the mega churches,
Yeah.
use charismatic pastors to market Jesus Christ more than anything else. It's a marketing strategy they use, don't they?
yeah, well, that's why they got the like the Crystal Palace and
Yeah,
all these
young,
massive
young
tributes
people
to money.
in India, especially the rise of the mega church. I mean, we're talking about 40,000, 50,000 people flocking to one single Sunday service by a very young, charismatic evangelism type pastor no denomination,
Right.
no nothing. The brand of Christianity they sell is exclusive to that mega church. Okay, it attracts Hindus, Muslims, Buddhists, Christians to the power of music they kick off with. Okay, and with all the latest instruments and musicians and new songs of Jesus and Christianity, and then followed by this incredible sermon, which actually is an advertisement for Jesus.
Well, they're also selling the experience.
Yeah, that's right.
Come for the experience, get the sermon for free.
Yeah.
Ranu's got her hand up and Tracy's next.
So sorry, I came in late, so was there a question affiliated with what Jim talked about?
What's your favorite
Um,
beer?
What's your favorite beer? I think I just thought it was interesting what you mentioned about the branding. I don't know why there's so much like a competition as to how, especially how Jesus has to be portrayed and to gain popularity. I feel that all of his whole representation is nothing but benevolence. Is that just not enough? And then he's of a higher power. He's of an entity that's beyond just the human condition, although I know he gets us. That's what makes the representation of Jesus so notable to so many around the world. But there seems to be something dissolving in maybe that's the way I've been raised, because when we think about higher power, there's some amount of respect that we want to give and honor and follow it. We are not necessarily on equal ground as the higher powers. They guide us and we look up to them, but why is there so much seeming to be marketing towards making him more masculine, more identifiable to our human conditions when we can strive to be maybe better than what we are? And what Jesus represents is complete benevolence and love. So I'm always twisted when I see some of those ads, I think it has a very good message because it humanizes so much of what's being told, but then it's not a complete picture, Should we not be aspiring to the higher good?
Those ads, commercials which Jim was referring to, it has this Jesus and then the last two letters,
Gets
us.
us.
Jesus has us in his name,
Oh,
US, and they kind of pull it out and say, it's us. Jesus is about us, US. Pretty soon, I know some rightist guy would come out and say, well, it has US in it, United States, probably, but Jesus is about US, but it's
dear.
how eye of the beholder.
I like the us part. The us in the word, that makes sense. It's all encompassing. But some of the messaging I thought was very interesting. And I think it shows us how it is in modern day that we are speaking at that same level and trying to create more of a welcome mat, right? You're welcome in this space, which I think is long, long, long overdue because there was a whole nother extreme in the past, right? Like so much division of who the in terms of a hierarchy. But it's just an interesting, I mean, I think I mentioned this in one of the last meetings. What really baffled me was, I guess, this whole movement with the NRA and things like that, the whole branding of Jesus, that Jesus isn't masculine enough. So we need to portray Jesus as being more manly or something. And then that was a whole deliverance of this American ideal of what a good Christian male should be. That was very bothersome for me.
We had an interesting discussion in our second session I was pondering the question of why our church is breaking up today, just kind of in general.
Before we go on, Jim, can we hear from Tracy and Sarah? They've got their hands up.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Tracy, you're muted.
It's funny that Ron who's spoke about what she did, because I feel very uncomfortable with the idea of using that word marketing, because I know church, is a business for every denomination. But and the whole Jesus thing, I just think God is so much bigger than that. And I really would like to see some other words used. For instance, faith would be a good one, and let each person figure out their own path to God and where they want to be, and not have them channeled in, because I think that's a big problem with what's going on with the division in our country right now, is some people just think that if you're not Christian, you're just not part of us or whatever, and their behavior is reflected in different ways. It's not very positive sometimes, and I don't know. I know it has to be a business and it has to be around money, but I just don't like the word marketing used with my faith. So that's how I stand. Sarah?
Yeah, just to kind of add to both of those points, I think um, people I've heard recently talk about Jesus are kind of emphasizing that his humanity doesn't get a big enough focus. That that there are a lot of don't know what that was. There are a lot of Christians that wouldn't know Jesus if they saw him today, because they don't like to think about the Jesus that hung around with taxpayers and prostitutes, and that turned over the table in the temple, and that would be pretty much hanging out with the undesirables. They would rather not think of it that way. That's not Jesus. And there's a lot of discussion going around how that's if Jesus came back today, a lot of people wouldn't recognize him, or they wouldn't want to recognize him, because we don't do those people.
Yeah. I think the phrase in the advertisement should have been Jesus gets me. Instead of us, because us means there's us and them, but Jesus gets me. It's your personal relationship. I think that's important. Or yeah, it can be important. So in our second session, I brought up this topic of why our church is breaking up over the current cultural issues. And we began that discussion, and you say, okay, you look at the U.S. Christian denominations, whether they're the Baptists, the Methodists, the Episcopalians, Presbyterians, have all addressed this in some fashion in terms of splitting in some way. Over the issues of the role of women in leadership, or the full acceptance of gays and others. So I said, well, let's take a little bigger, little broader look at it rather than the denominations. You have traditional church, you have the mega church, and you have home church. In which case, one of the members in the group came up and says, "Oh, those mega churches, it's like a mile wide and an inch deep." And I thought a moment about, how to respond to that, because there's nothing, certainly I don't mean there's nothing wrong, or I don't want to say anything bad about traditional churches. They do a lot of great stuff for a lot of people. But the mega churches brought in hundreds of thousands of people to faith who weren't in faith, or came to practice faith who weren't practicing faith. So what's the problem here? Maybe they weren't reading Bible verses every night, but they were coming and practicing a faith every week for some of them, hundreds of thousands of people. So maybe what brought them in was a charismatic preacher. Maybe what brought them in was the music. Hillsong Church out of Australia spread worldwide, and was kind of one of the big movers in terms of multi-location mega churches. What's wrong with it if it brings people into faith in some fashion? Why is that bad? Because the traditional churches, I think, were letting some people down. They weren't giving them what they needed or what they were seeking, and a lot of the mega churches were. Perhaps the same for the home church, and the same for perhaps what we're doing at the moment. We also in that session came to a little bit of a crisis moment in terms of some people believing in some of the fundamentals of the traditional churches being right, which to me, you can only head down that road by exclusion. The end result of that is exclusion. But not wanting to make it a disagreement or an argument, we just let them go forward to explain their position. Another person held a similar position, but it didn't want to challenge it at the time. We continued the discussion. It was a good discussion. We continued to have a nice dinner afterwards and continue to have a good discussion. But I would like to ask each of you your thoughts on this. What would happen in a discussion like this that we're having if someone was there with and expressed an opinion that you were in strong disagreement with?
I think I'd ask them to explain to me how they, just more about how they feel on that, or how they came to learn about that. Not trying to keep my tone out of my voice, and see if I can lower my blood pressure when I hear their answer.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else have a thought?
Yeah, Jim, it might be a case of either why do you think the way you do, or what do you feel that the traditional religions or groups, do you feel that they've let you down, and why? That made you go to this group instead? Like, what's the difference? So I mean that might be something.
Rachel?
I'm trying to
I was just gonna say,
think here, cross really. Oh, go ahead, Rich.
sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. One of the things that strikes me would be it falls in line a lot of what you're talking about with beer and Coke, and what Rick just said is like, well, why do you like these things? And it to me is a personal, like, what does that bring you by being in this, like, what does that opinion bring you? Does it, for some people who are so adamant, and if we're talking about extreme, I mean, it kind of depends on what it is, but usually it's something that brings them something, whether it's safety or security or the community that they're looking for, even if it's not a positive community. So my question would then be, what is this bringing to you?
Mhm.
Well, is there really a right answer?
No.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, everybody, uses or believes what works for them. And in the end, the result theoretically is the same.
Well,
So,
just good to know what it is. It might help you understand them more.
oh, absolutely.
Because everybody's answer isn't going to be the same, I wouldn't think, but I don't know.
I don't think everybody's answer is going to be, sorry, Netta, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead. You're muted.
I'm trying to think here, cross religiously. Is this a Christianity specific struggle issue that we are dealing with? Does Hinduism think about it like this? Does Islam? Does Buddhism? I mean, I have not seen a Hindu struggling with, oh, what's my faith? Why am I like this? Why can't I, brand it and probably sell it? And I don't see those questions dominating different faiths other than us Christians. In my view, I don't know. I could be wrong. Maybe Ranu has a different interpretation, but I'm thinking about selling something, marketing or branding or remember, I always believe that there's expansionist religions and there are non-expansionist religions. The two expansionist religions are Christianity and Islam. They believe in expanding their faith to all other countries, all other religions. Both religions do that, Christianity and Islam. Hinduism doesn't do that. Buddhism doesn't do that. So, and Judaism doesn't do that. So these are the five major religions, faiths we're talking about. Two of them are expansionist. Maybe these questions are inherent in these two faiths of expansionist religion. And that kind of influences our faith because of that mission-oriented, we're driven to church planting, we're driven to expanding our faith and making others believe the way we do. And these are naturally inherent, these questions we're struggling with are inherent in that kind of ideological aspects of our faith. And that's something we need to keep in mind, that, Christianity and Islam would make up half of the human race, but the other half is not. So those are my observations.
Ananda's question. Again, no expert in the field except for what I've read, and when it comes at least to the faith of Hinduism, there has been a struggle in the last century, and it's so old that it goes in waves, right? Popular, unpopular, questioning, drop it, come back to it. And one has to remember that it stemmed from a regional place, the peninsula of India, right? So what I was understanding, especially there was a desire to kind of touch back with the faith because it was starting to become burdensome, I think, for many modern Indians in the 60s and 70s to say, like, why do we need this ritualistic kind of religion? Again, it was because of so many other distractions and modern times. And so there was a big development of trying to reconnect back with the faith and the understanding, the philosophy of Hinduism. So all of a sudden, many more books in English or in common languages throughout, and maybe some central systems that were developed that were mission-based to try to teach, more to teach about the faith and to kind of reconnect back the tenets of the faith. So I think we'll see this going up and down, and I'm talking about within the context of India itself. In my context, my parents left India. So guess what they did? You hold on to what you really desire to, that's placed your identity. So faith was big, for example, for my mother, because she left it behind. So she was a representation of her own faith and her own culture and her own everything else that she could identify with. So it's interesting for the immigrants who left maybe a region, I'm sure anywhere in the world where maybe the faith kind of was embodied in that regional culture, then you actually worked harder to honor your faith a lot of the times because you were away from it. You were away from the source. And so you worked harder within your home and within your little communities to celebrate your faith and your culture. So it's a really interesting, if you look at the timelines of different faiths, you'll see these interesting stories and bumps in the road. Now, today's time, there's been so many things happening because now India is kind of in this reckoning, and it's politically driven. A lot of it saying that, who are we as Indians? We've just been colonized and invaded. Who were we originally? Now we have to get back to the OG, which is the Hindu philosophy. So it's kind of, there's an interesting set of conflicts, I guess, happening when it comes to the political realm of at least the region of India. As a faith, though, Hinduism has been picked up by everybody else because of the whole yoga trend and the Beatles and all these other interesting, cool things. Whereas in the meantime, the Indians who were like, yeah, you can have it. And then they kind of gave it away, And now I think Hindus or Indians, if you want to call it, because I don't really separate it, because again, Hinduism came from the land of the Indus Valley, the Indians. They're kind of wanting to reclaim it back now, and say we have something to be, so we want to honor our traditions and our philosophy. And we have to remember, like, some of these really old faiths or religions, they were never religions. Like Hinduism was a philosophy first. The religious tenets came later on with following and human interpretation and so on.
Jeff, you have a comment?
So I grew up in a beer house, and not a beer house, a house, a regular family, but we were a beer family, and I didn't like the results that we got as a beer family. So I was my first drink was a screwdriver, and because I had heard that vodka didn't taste like anything. And I pretty quickly switched to White Russians because they tasted more like a milkshake and less like vodka. And
I guess
Is it?
Jeff went to the right Russian.
Well,
I know.
Sarah's still with her hand up, so we can
Sarah, you want to go ahead while we wait for Jeff to come back?
I was gonna say in response to your question, Jim, it depends on it depends on what these people want to keep, and it depends on whether I'm going to be required to abide by it if I stay in the group, if I want to stay in the group, or stay in the church if I was part of the church.
Yeah.
If it's going to be there is the United Church in Halliburton is non-affirming. which means that they don't. The official position of the United Church is that they are welcoming of gays, lesbians, bisexual, transgender, and everybody on that everyone along that spectrum. But they let the congregations make up their own minds on whether they want to be affirming the United Church, and Halliburton is not. So if I ever decided I wanted to go back to church, the United Church won't be one that I go to. Because I don't want to be part of a congregation that in order to attend that congregation, I have to there's an insinuation that I take on those values as well.
Mhm.
So yeah, you know, if they're talking about, you know, well, I have to be part of communion should be every week instead of every month. Well, no, okay, I don't really care about that. All right, communion, yeah, whatever. Make communion wherever you want. That doesn't mean that doesn't mean you're excluding anybody from your church unless they don't happen to like taking communion every week, and that's their business. But no, if you're going to be excluding people, then yeah, then and you have to take that or leave it, then I'll probably leave it.
Mhm.
And that's why a lot of people left the Anglican Church when they started talking about how gays and lesbians, I don't know if they've made this policy, but there was a point when they were talking about whether gays and lesbians should be allowed to be ministers, and the young people started to leave in droves
Mhm.
because they were like, yeah, I don't want to be a part of that.
Yeah, Sarah, Tracy, go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking back to what you were talking about a few minutes ago and what Anantha said about, you know, the mega churches having a lot of people in them, thousands of people, and the one that Anantha was talking about in India, where, you know, they have all kinds of faiths coming together in these big churches, and about how, you know, thinking about Christianity, I think it does have that that growth factor comes, you know, from way back. Because I believe Jesus wanted us to tell our neighbors and tell other people about it. And then all of a sudden it caught fire. And that's just kind of been a message I think a lot of Christians have taken to. And maybe that's, you know, I don't know if it's connected to the word marketing, but I wonder if the marketing could be around just happening people to people, one person at a time kind of thing, instead of having it. I mean, I was attracted to that, whatever we were watching. I can't even remember what we were watching when that ad came on that you were talking about around Jesus Gets Us. But it did grab me. I did hear it. So, you know, maybe that's another way to get the word out. But I don't know if it just seems so impersonal to me. When our faith is such a personal thing. So I don't know if marketing is the right word and that's the right venue for it, but anyway, that's a whole nother conversation.
I think you have to ask yourselves, is it all about getting asses in seats?
Or money, you know, it's
Is that
always,
what your faith is?
yeah, it's always, yeah, that too. It's always about money.
All right, I've taken you through two threads here. One is the issue of, okay, but just a second, Michelle. wait, go ahead,
Jeff-
Michelle.
Jeff's
There's
coming
the
back
hands
in.
up.
and Jim has his hand up.
Well, one issue that I've seen is in all this discussion is that bothers me is Christianity tries to reach out to others because so many Christians feel we are right and others are wrong if they don't believe like we do. And one of the things I've liked about Ekklesia is that feeling isn't here. Even though I think many of you are Christian and support Christianity, you're not saying we are right. And I think that's a major issue in all this.
That really came through in our discussions as well in that second session, Jim, is that same concept that you mentioned there. And as a result of that discussion, I got the answer that I was searching for. Why are the churches breaking up? It's because many of the people in those churches prefer to worship with people with similar beliefs. And sometimes those similar beliefs catch on this issue of right and wrong. And so while some of us wouldn't choose to be part of that, there's other people who do. And that's the heart of why they're breaking up, because they choose to want to be able to worship in congregations with people who have similar beliefs around certain key issues. And often it comes off as right and wrong, sometimes because they do think of it as right and wrong. So that was one thread. Go ahead.
What Tracy was saying made me think a little bit more. But and Christ was sincere in saying, "Go preach my gospel to rest of the nations," and and the second coming actually doesn't take place until every soul living on this planet would have heard his name. Okay, so in other words, go preach, right? And that kind of led to a very nasty, jingoistic approach to spread of Christianity, to the extent where the popes went to war and beheaded people who did not convert, right? I mean, that's the nasty legacy of Christianity or Christendom that European history gave us. So did Islam, where Prophet Muhammad says, by the sword that you carry, behead the people who don't believe in Allah's name. I mean, so these are the two religions, actually, more than any other religion, that have actually tainted that really good spirit of spreading the word to bring goodness to non-believers by going to the extreme of doing that. And sometimes I wonder, and I'm afraid, these mega churches fall under that. Some of them have that undertone of political extremism combined or couched in the language of Christianity. And those that could actually lead to religious extremism, like some of the extremist groups in this country actually are very Christian in belief, but believe in racial superiority. And that leads us to treat the immigrants on the southern border, or wherever. I mean, it leads to a very nasty consequences. And that's one of the issues, which is also splitting up churches and the denominations too. But I'm very sad about. But
All right, I want to carry through two more thoughts with you this evening. One is around the branding analogy to religion. I know it's an imperfect analogy, but first I want to talk to you a little bit about my journey to beer. I was not a beer drinker. I mean, I would drink beer. I didn't care for beer too much. I like wine better for a long time. Back when I first met Tracy, she would cook for me And I would go and try to find the wine that would go with the food. I would go to the liquor mart, which used to be a Safeway store, but was now totally just liquor, beer, and wine. They had a whole aisle of German wines, a whole aisle of Italian wines. And I just loved to learn about wine because there was all this stories and all this stuff to learn and all this stuff to figure out. You got to taste the wine. I got to eat Tracy's food. I was a wine guy. South Carolina. And in South Carolina, I had a beer called Son of a Peach from R.J. Rockers. This was a really good wheat beer with 85 pounds of real peaches in every batch. It was going to be a filtered beer, but the peach stuff clogged up the filters, so they made it an unfiltered beer, getting ahead of the phase with hazy beers. I love Son of a Peach. I thought, oh, this beer is really good. It wasn't like Budweiser or Bud Light. It was a really good beer. Well, near our house is a place called Southern Growl. It was around the corner from a strip mall, not even in the strip mall, but around the corner from a strip mall. One door, not a very big place. It had a counter, and above the counter were 3 giant TV screens with a list of 60 different beers to try. 60 different beers on tap, craft beers on tap, and it changed all the time. And you go in there, and the people really knew about beer. And you would just go and you get to try something new. You'd have a beer experience. You could talk about beer. You could enjoy different beers, find what you like, find what you don't like. You come in 2 weeks later, it was a whole different group of beers out there. So I really became to love beer for 2 reasons. One was all these wonderful tastes I was experiencing. And I got to share this learning experience about beer with everybody else in there who were doing the same thing, learning about beer and sharing the experience. We loved the taste of the beer we were tasting, or not, and loved to talk about it, and did it in a community of craft beer drinkers. So at that time, I became a true beer lover, a craft beer lover. Very similar thing happened to me. I was not a faith practitioner. I was not a faith drinker.
And let me just say, I did try the best I could for like what, 30 years or so. And then Michelle comes along.
Exactly. So religion didn't appeal to me, just as commercial beer didn't appeal to me. I didn't find it interesting, stimulating, or satisfying. I found it contradictory. I found it problematic. It wasn't resonating with me. But now, with the beginnings of Ekklesia, first to me, it wasn't about faith. It was about this small group of people with this interesting conversations around Michelle's calling. And I thought, I'm going to try this out because it sounds interesting. And I started learning about the history of religion and what the history of the cultures at the time. And I found it fascinating. And I had read this huge book about, this is all really in. I found myself enjoying talking about religion and then about faith. And then faith came to me. I just became a believer. Not in religion, but in faith. And by faith, I mean your personal relationship with God. I'd found that personal relationship with God, not by drinking from religion, but by discussing with other people, what do you think about faith? What is your faith? What's been your experience with faith? That's what caused me to be very interested in it. And I love to talk about people. I love to talk to people about faith today. So my experience with beer and faith had been very similar in that regard. I moved from one place to another based on a truly wide experience in community with others, talking about what we liked, about what we believed in. Craft beer and faith, for me. Just to wrap it up around the branding, what was important in these taste tests we had, what people were experiencing, they were responding to the brand and not the taste of the beer. They were missing the point. The point should be the beer, not the branding. I'll carry the very loose analogy over to religion. To me, the point should not be the religion. The point should be your faith, your personal relationship with God. And if your religion matches up with that, all the better. Great. You got the whole package. You got a community. You've got a built-in canon. Everything's going for you. That's wonderful. So that's super. Nothing wrong with that. That's a great experience to have. That's what hundreds of thousands, millions of people have had for a long time. Didn't work for me. So in terms of why you believe, why you have the faith you have, for me, it was about your personal relationship with God is the core of my faith, and what I find that attracts me to it and keeps me excited about the way faith is today, about what the future might be. It's not about the brand, it's about the taste of the beer. It's not about religion, it's about your faith. What do you think?
Sarah?
And pardon me if I've got your analogy backwards, because I'm trying to understand it here. I think it's and I think I said this last week too. I think it's great if you can separate the religion from the taste of the beer. That's fabulous. And that's and I'm very happy if the taste of the beer was so bad that you're never gonna forget it. Like if you were, and pardon me for bringing it up, I don't like it either. If you were one of those boys who was molested by the Catholic priests, you're gonna have an awfully hard time doing that. Just saying.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always that easy. I was thinking today, I prayed the salvation prayer when I was, no, I'm gonna tell a different story. I heard this on a, I prayed the salvation prayer when I was 7 years old. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't understand it at all. I said to the woman, "You're gonna be in my heart by bedtime?" She said, "He's in your heart now." But yeah, one of my atheist call-in shows this week, I was listening to an atheist father who called in and to get some advice. He was frantic. He said, trying very, very hard not to indoctrinate my little girl. He said, because I want her to make her own decisions about this. She's 10 years old. He said, but she's going to her mom's on the weekend. Her mom has married a very, very conservative Baptist. And she came home to me this week and she started to cry. And I asked her, baby girl, what's wrong? And she said, and she was crying. He said, well, Daddy, you're going to hell. And he said, what do I do? And this guy I talked about, Forrest Valkai, was on the show that week. And he said, this is why. He said, religion will never be not harmful. He said, that little girl is traumatized.
I appreciate both Jim and Sarah sharing their stories. That's helpful, both. Thank you.
And they gave him some very good advice about how to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
So that when this happens again, when she comes home from visiting her mom again, how to deal with it, because they've done 1,000 calls like this before. there used to be a whole show on secular parenting that these two people used to do. But yeah, and I thought, holy shit, that hit me right there. Thank you, Jim. I appreciate that.
Okay, Jeff, what is the rest of the story? You disappeared on us. Come back.
So this I was trying to answer Jim's question about what would I do in a conversation with people who expressed an opinion that I disagreed with, and generally I've had that opinion. I've been in that place, so 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 it's not a reaction of it's a matter of just trying to be together is what I want to do, what I'm trying to do with the people that I'm in communication with now. So yeah, to me, this has been a great discussion, but there's lots of different places where I'm connecting with it. So I'm going to get off for now. Thanks.
But Jeff, during that discussion, when it came up, I wish I'd have been a little better prepared for it. I was kind of prepared for something to happen sometime, somewhere, somehow.
Yeah.
So in thinking about it afterwards, you kind of got three choices at that point. What do you do? Now, let's start with a few basics. One, these are people you like. These are good people. You're having a good conversation.
Right.
You invited them in to have deep thoughts, discussions. Okay. We start with that base. So it's not like they're bad, you're good, you're trying to win. So your choices at that point are forget the one about I'm going to have a debate, I'm going to prove I'm right. I mean, that's not even a choice in this discussion.
Yeah.
One, you can choose to just accept what they've said and move on, so as not to make the group uncomfortable, or to generate more discontent within the group. That's one choice you can make at that point. A second choice you can make is to be curious about their opinion, genuinely. And then, of course, you would ask, like some people said before, you ask the questions, well, that's interesting. Why do you think that way? Or whatever other questions you want to move toward that, but not to be superficially curious, but generally curious, and to have the conversations to understand what they're saying. Now, that doesn't mean then you say, but I think this. No, if you're genuinely curious, you're going to ask them and wait and let them explain their thoughts some more. The problem with the first two choices is there may be other people in on the discussion, including yourself, who disagree. And if somebody can't stand up for my side, I'm feeling left out. I'm feeling abandoned. I'm feeling, bad about this. So if you're feeling that I feel much differently here, if you're not standing up for that in some fashion, you're also letting down other people who are probably feeling that way as well. And then the question becomes how to engage the conversation further in that in a constructive, positive manner, and so forth. And that's a skill I need to work on and learn. It's something like, well, I appreciate that's what you believe. Here's how I see it. Or as I think it was Brian McLaren who told us that. Well, I just see it differently. I mean, here's what I think, rather than making it a challenge. But if you choose the one thing about choosing the third route is the people who haven't spoken up, who are feeling disrespected, put out, unheard, it's not right either. So somehow you got to do it. You got to do a blend of somehow all three of those, and what's best for that moment. How do you do that to make it go forward? How do you get something out of that rather than just ignore it? Because there's people who are unheard in the room as well that also need to be heard, or at least felt that they're recognized, or their thoughts are recognized. So it was a difficult situation. I kind of chose the route of, because it wasn't part of the main thought process that we're talking about, was well, let's just move on to the next part of the conversation. And I was a little disappointed in myself that I didn't find a way to get more out of it at the time, but you learned from it and prepared to do better next time. At least we didn't start yelling at each other.
But Jim,
Go ahead, Anantha.
there's something particularly disarming about what Jim's separation of faith from religion. There's, I think it's more liberating to talk about faith detached from religion, because it really individualizes your conviction, and it frees you from a dogma that you are attached to, because you always believed, at least I always was taught, religion equals faith. I mean, they're interchangeable, and one and the same. But I think one of the best parts of the Ekklesia, and especially what Jim just said, is makes it, convincing to me, is I'm free to more free to talk about faith than religion. Religion makes me uncomfortable to have a conversation with somebody. But if you say faith, I can individualize it and say faith means this is what it means to me. And I'd like to know what it means to you. So it's easier to engage in a dialogue with friends when you don't associate with a religion per se. But that takes, actually, it's more challenging to practice that way. It's not easy to detach yourself from a lifetime of identifying faith with religion. It takes a lot more effort to detach those two aspects, and that's the challenge Michelle has to bring into. To educate or to have a dialogue, continuing dialogue on how and what faith can do for us more than religion. Those are my thoughts, by the way.
Rachel?
There's a couple points, but the last point that you guys were talking about, I like that you're using beer for this conversation. And I think you did a really good job of finding that equal ground to have a conversation and take that, because there's something behind it. Like Anantha was saying, it's a harder time talking about religion, but everybody loves food. There's not a single person in this group that does not like to eat something or drink something or have something. And it gives you that equal ground to discuss. And even if we were talking earlier about how hard it might be for somebody to come back to a religion. My grandfather was actually somebody who had issues with priests as a child and would never go back to the Catholic Church, but instead went to Lutheran and had my mom and my aunt and uncles all raised in a Lutheran church. And I look at that and go, okay, well, he didn't want to go back to that church, so he found a different drink. Some people won't go back to Christianity. If I leave Christianity as a beer, then some people can go to any other religion, but it's your different drink. Where you were talking about earlier, you used to never drink beer. You used to only drink wine. it leaves us to discuss, okay, well, I'm a wine drinker and I won't drink beer because I don't like the way it tastes, or I don't like what they do, or I don't like what's in it. It gives that equal ground where it takes the high intense emotion out because it's something that is to taste. So I really do love that you're using that, and I think it was great to use with our group, and I think it's a really great way of taking that excess emotion that can happen out of it. But I do feel that, and I feel that it was just a great way of allowing more room for, you were working with a group that loves beer, but like in this group here, there's some people who don't like beer and they like vodka, they like whatever, but it still leaves that equal room for us to have a discussion about it. I appreciate that is my main point, but I think you're doing a good job with what your aim was.
Well, thank you, Rachel. Tracy?
Well, I think about when I took my class with Just Faith on Want to Talk and how to have difficult conversations. And one of the, our very first session together, there were probably about, 8 to 10, depending on how many people came. But, there were some ground rules. And one of them is that we would be present when we met, because we knew we would be learning some things about each other and visiting with each other. And one of the ground rules was to listen without judgment, and everyone had a chance to say something. And sometimes we can't just assume that a group of people we have together are going to do those things. And I mean, I wasn't put off by having these ground rules ahead of time. And it really set the stage from the moment these 8 people came together. And we didn't know, well, I knew a few of them, but not all of them, and not very well. But after the ground rules were introduced to us, people shared with each other much more than they ever would have if we hadn't had those shared at the beginning of the class. And if you're interested, I'll show them, I'll give them to you later. But there was something that, of course, the class lasted 8 weeks too. And something like that doesn't happen in one session, just like, we didn't have this connection with each other after 2 or 3 weeks together, right? It takes time. But I think that helps a lot, having those ground rules.
Yeah. Sarah, I wanted to mention, you mentioned about the girl coming home and telling her daddy he was going to hell. One of the barriers that kept me from coming back to religion was the issue of hell. I didn't think there shouldn't be any hell. It's not part of my faith. And so Michelle says, no, there's this movie you got to see. It's called Heretic by Rob Bell. He was the leader of a megachurch in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Then he wrote this book about a different way to look at faith. And one of the parts of it was, no, there's no hell. We can get rid of hell. Well, that was an eye opener for me, but I realized, well, wait, you can have faith without having to have these things that are keeping you away from it. So for me, one of the barriers were if hell is part of religion, I wanted no part of it. Okay, there's no hell. There's still a lot of other good stuff. So that was the first barrier that came down for me that kept me from even considering religion, was when I realized that you don't have to take the whole thing as it's been laid out in a certain religion. You can take the parts that resonate with your personal faith and let that grow.
That's what they told me in the discussion group that I took in university about leaving religious communities. I was just 19 at the time, but the older ladies in the group said to me, if it's not working for you, just leave it. You don't have to keep it. And it terrified me. scared the hell out of me.
Yeah.
I didn't like that because I'd always heard, Christians can't do that. You can't. I understand it better now. I understand what they were trying to say to me now, but it took me 6 years to work that out, that and not be afraid of that. And that was and hell was a big one for me too. That was one of the I figured everybody went to heaven or nobody did. It didn't work otherwise. But when you're 16, 17, 18 years old and the Bible is infallible, but there's really nothing, there's not a whole lot in the Bible about hell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Michelle, we filled up the hour and a half. Want to take us down to our prayer?
Yeah, but before we do that, I'd like to leave you all with something to think about that we'll bring back into a circle conversation coming up in a few weeks. But a lot of what I'm hearing tonight, and thank you all for sharing so deeply personal some of these stories. Did everybody who wanted to share get a chance to do that? All right, so something that came up in one of my classes recently that I had never thought of before, and I think kind of what I'm hearing here toward the end is a fitting segue to this. And I don't want to, it is a whole other night's discussion, but I want you to take this and sit with it for a while. If you were to totally strip away everything that you've been told, everything that you were raised to believe, however far back you need to go, as far back to the beginning of you as possible. Strip it all away. And you were to ask yourself, who was I before all of this, or this people, or this religion, or this belief? Who was I before I was told this about myself? Once you strip all that away, what is really true about you and your being? So sit with that for a while. Journal if you're journaling. But I think stripping all that away, everything that you've learned through the years, known, encountered, just go back to your very beginning and think about what is true. Who was I before all that? Let's pray. Lord, you are true, and you know us, I believe, better than we know ourselves. But help us to remember. Amen.